Good to see all of you, and I know all of you, so thanks for joining in today. I'm Kathy Kilroy with Career Management Partners, and CMP, along with the Overture Group, are the sponsor companies for this Career Management Group session. At CMP, our business is all about helping people advance in your careers. We work with organizations across the full talent life cycle to recruit, assess, develop people, and transition employees and transform careers with outplacement solutions. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. Please mute yourself for the presentation. And we welcome you to stay on video and keep your camera on throughout. Questions can be asked in the chat. And at the bottom of your screen, we'll probably take most questions at the end, but we've got a small group and we want to make this as interactive as possible. So we'll kind of go with the flow throughout. Today's meeting is being extended for an additional half hour to allow for networking after the presentation. So if you're able to stay on for an additional 20 minutes or so afterwards, we'll do breakout sessions that'll give you the opportunity to connect with everybody and meet new colleagues. We're also offering 1 CPE credit today for this meeting. You must attend the full hour to receive that CPE credit and contact Susan to get it. Susan's going to put her contact information in the chat. Before we get started, I want to welcome any guests to FEI and let you know that FEI is offering a 6-month free trial membership, which I encourage you to take advantage of. I'm a 20-year member and sponsor of FEI and have developed so many wonderful friendships with FEI colleagues and learned so much in the process. This is a very active chapter, as all of you on the session today know. As a member, you'll have the opportunity to connect and build relationships with other financial leaders in Chicagoland and nationally to expand your network and benchmark best practices. You can participate in both live and virtual professional development forums, and you receive continuing education credits all along the way. There are a number of leadership opportunities for you on local and national committees and a chance to boost your career opportunities. And you'll also have online access through FEI Connect to financial executives throughout the country. Chicago chapter is very active. We have all kinds of events coming up. Our signature event is always the CFO of the Year Awards, which draws over 900 people. And I'm pleased to give you big news today that our first in-person event is actually scheduled for July 23rd at the Arlington Park Racetrack. So please save the date for that. You can reach out to Susan to take advantage of the free FEI membership. One final request, after today's session, we're going to send you a link to complete a short 3-minute evaluation, and we really appreciate your time to complete it and give us your feedback. It helps us in our program committee planning moving forward. And let me also take this opportunity to introduce you to our program committee meeting members who are on the phone with us today. So Vince Dorado, give us a wave, everyone, when I introduce you. Vince Dorado, he's our committee chair. Jerry Novotny, Mike Conti, my fellow sponsor for the CMG, Lyle Field, Grant Thornton, thank you, Lyle. And I think and
Bob Lynn.
Pardon me?
Bob Lynn.
And Bob. Thank you. Hey, Bob. Thank you. Okay. And now let's get started. So I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker, Joe Frodsham, to talk about diversity as a business imperative and share current trends and best practices in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Joe is the president of CMP and leads our firm, which is the largest national minority and women-owned firm working with organizations across the full talent cycle. Joe is an author and speaker and recognized expert on careers, employee engagement, leadership development, and organizational effectiveness. He consults with a number of private and public company boards and is a member of the Forbes Coaching Council and a regular contributor to Forbes magazine on talent management and leadership topics. Welcome, Joe. Welcome back. I think this is your third time around with the FEI Career Management Group. So we're glad to have you.
It's great to be here, and I'm like a bad cold. I just show up once in a while. So, thank you for putting up with me, y'all. And I really look forward to getting through this content. And it's great to see a couple of colleagues with Kathy and Gail on there. So CMP is well represented today. And, I've come to really appreciate FEI. I think you're a big part of our story, especially in the Chicagoland area. And so thank you. Thank you for this chance. And I'll dive right in, y'all. First of all, we have a technology opportunities. I go ahead and share the screen. So I'm going to share the screen. And I'm going to turn my camera off so that we can focus and I can focus on the screen, if that's okay. And then we'll get going. And again, thank you for this opportunity. This is, it's interesting. Just a little context. We are a minority women-owned firm. A little bit more of kind of that story is the 51% of the firm is owned by my wife. And so this whole issue of minority and, I guess of racial, what I'll call strife, certainly conversations that we've had over the last year or so has been very interesting, both professionally and personally. It's been something that we've really had to think about as a firm. What is our stance? What's our philosophy? How can we contribute to the conversation? And certainly even personally, as we look at our family and the dynamics of our family, which, are great. We've never really thought through the issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion the way that I think current events have really required us to, even on a family level. And as part of that, we have thought, we've, I think, gotten very coalesced around what we believe philosophically and so on. And I think part of our mission as CMP is to help organizations really lean in, adapt, make sense of, and adopt those principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion that help them both create the environment and culture they want, but also retrieve the business results that they want. One has to go with the other. So to that end, this presentation and the content I'm going to share with you is somewhat pragmatic in nature. I'm really going to go through a lot of information that comes from our research, that comes from our polling, and I'll share that in a little bit of a second, and what we see as far as emerging trends and best practices out there. My hope is that you take something from this that helps you in your current context, whether you're looking for a job, you're in a job, you're leading this space, you're supporting this space. Hopefully you take a few things out of here that will help you both as a business and against your kind of mandate in the DE&I space. So let's dive in. I think you know us. It's already been explained. I don't want to spend too much time here, but we do support executive search, executive development, and career transition types activities. We are very engaged. Not only are we certified as a minority woman-owned business, but we're very engaged in this process and been recognized as such on a number of different levels over the last few years. We work with a lot of different companies. Okay, we got those. Here's what we're going to cover. First of all, I want to go through the DE&I survey that we administered late last year. And this went out to a number of leaders, maybe a number of you, to really kind of gauge your input on a number of topics and areas that we find are very relevant to DE&I and the culture thereof. So I'm going to go through the numbers. And given that you're all CFOs, I thought you'd appreciate that. So we're going to go through numbers for a while here, really talk about what we see. And then we're going to say, so what? What are some emerging trends and talent practices that we see out there that you really need to consider and think through as far as the implications and ramifications for your company? And then I'm going to share pretty quickly a construct of coaching that we have found to be kind of game-changing, honestly, when it comes to really embedding and driving a level of institutionalized systemic DE&I within your company. At the end, then, we will have some questions. So I'd ask you as we go through this to submit questions via the chat feature. And my colleague Kathy will be sharing those at the end, because what I'd really like to have is a conversation where we really kind of operationalize, discuss, answer any questions that might be real for you, helpful for you as you kind of work through this space in your particular world and company. All right, let's dive in. Our pulse check. Pulse check was in Q4. We published the results in December of last year, so I think the results are still fresh. We had over 130 key executive leaders participate from 16 different industries across the United States in every region. These pulse check results really do highlight how inescapable diversity, equity, and inclusion is becoming in our world of work. It looks a little different in each region, it looks a little different in different companies, but the broad premise and the import and the paramount nature of it is certainly real clear in the results. As I go through these results, I'd ask you to do the following. Just think about how true that is of you. How would you answer that question now? And then, of course, you'll see how the questions were answered by these 130 kind of key leaders who completed it. First one had to do around diversity as a strategic imperative. To what degree is it important relative to everything else that's important in your environment and in the workplace? And basically 60% of pulse check respondents answer that having a diverse and inclusive leadership was the most critical aspect in the workplace. So of all the different dimensions that you could focus on, your investment in people, access to senior leaders, meritocratic organizational structure, initiative to increase fairness. It's funny, I've never seen diversity. If we've asked different variants of this question through the years, I've never seen diversity and inclusion be the top getter when it comes to the important factor that needs to be in your workplace environment. It's been things like having a culture of fairness. I've seen culture of meritocracy, et cetera. But certainly DE&I is number one now. You can kind of wonder whether that's true for you, if you think that really is the number one aspect of a healthy workplace or not. But certainly that's what our response is. Next is career development. We found this is a really important question and area to focus on and probe as far as a key indicator of truly a fair, equitable environment. Do you feel that you have access to bigger and broader opportunities in your career within your company? 73% of survey participants answered that within their organization, there is a career development path for all employees. That's pretty good. It's better than I've seen in years past. That means there's still, of course, 27% of companies where people are not feeling that way and people don't have ready and fair access to career development opportunities and career mobility if they wish it. You could answer, you kind of wonder, is that true of your organization? Next one. It's interesting. Positive, diverse interactions. We found this is really a critical indicator. To what degree are there positive interactions between and amongst people who are different? And it's interesting that now about 71% of respondents report that employees with different backgrounds interacted well within their organizations. It's better than we've seen it in the past. That means there's still, about 30% where they're saying that's not necessarily true. Question for you, is that true in your organization? DE&I training. This one's interesting. We found that, if I asked how many of your organizations have DE&I training at one point in the past, almost all would be close to 100%. Yet 24% of survey participants shared that their organization provides training on a regular basis. So often what happens is people go through DE&I training at the once, kind of like they're immersed through it once and they got stamped. But often it's not an ongoing set of activities. It's not refreshed. It's not something that happens annually or even semi-annually, often not even once a decade. And what we found is this whole area of training has often been kind of the centerpiece of DE&I introduction and development within a company. Yet it's often insufficient. Not only is it not done regularly, but often it's dated. I mean, when we look at DE&I training, this is such an evolving area with so many different elements that are emerging and things to consider as we look at current events and other evolving pieces of this, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, that what we found is for DE&I training to really be successful, three things have to be in place. One is it has to be done regularly, not just once. It has to be refreshed and updated regularly. And you absolutely can't be your full and sole source of DE&I embedment in the organization. It has to be complementary of other things that you're doing. But 24% of survey participants shared that they do it on a regular basis. Most of us aren't. This one's interesting. DE&I progress. 63%, almost 2/3 of survey participants responded their organizations are making progress on DE&I. So, it's a majority, but still about a third or more that did not answer affirmatively as far as progress being made. This one's interesting. More equitable workplace. 65% indicated that within their organization, everyone is treated fairly, whereas 35% did not answer affirmatively on that. So 2/3 yes, 1/3 no. Obviously, there's still some work to do. Finally, I think this one, if you take nothing from this first few minutes and really talking through survey, I always believe it's important to take a next step. What can I do, Monday morning to really make an impact? Only 26% of survey respondents answered that their organization actively communicated their DE&I goals. If what we found is best-in-class companies are very declarative and bold when it comes to their goals in this space, whatever they may be, as far as hiring targets, as far as interview rotation, how many people are going to be represented in different interview rotations, as far as succession targets, whatever they are, and they're bold and they're declarative. 3/4 of companies are not doing that. They're not being very bold and declarative when it comes to their goals in this space. I would encourage you to do that. Think about where you want to stake a claim and what mountain you want to climb when it comes to this space. Get alignment and be bold. You will get a lot of credit for doing it, and then the actual work of DE&I becomes inescapable in your part of the world, in your business. So something to take away. Does everyone know your DE&I goal in your company? If not, what is it? And can we be declarative and bold around it? If you do, you'll get a lot of credit and you'll actually move the needle in ways that are really difficult otherwise. All right. That was a quick shot of data. We'll share this presentation at the end of, the meeting, and we'll get this out so you can take a look at it, spend some more time on it. And again, I'd encourage you to look through those questions and ask them yourself. And where are you in your organization when it comes to these key indicators of diversity, equity, inclusion? Now I'm going to really spend a little time going through key and emerging trends and 5 empowering talent practices. Among all the different activity, areas of focus, and there is a lot. It's very much an evolving area. These are the 4 things that I think are really important takeaways that have immediate implications on how you address, lead, and embed DEI in your company. So I want to go through each. We'll discuss it. Certainly, if you have questions, submit them via the chat, and we can have a conversation, at the end of this. The first one is multi-generational workforce. We're seeing this in all the literature with our clients consistently in this space, that for the first time ever, we have 5 distinct generations in the workplace. It's the first time this has ever happened. First of all, the silent generation, those between 1928 and 1945, a lot of those folks, you folks, us folks, are still working. What we found is people don't actually retire anymore. They all want to keep a foot in it. They all want to do board work, community work, and stay active. A lot of times they have to do it for financial reasons. So for whatever reason, they are still in the workforce. Yet we also have baby boomers, and they're very well represented. And then the often overlooked generation, Generation X. This is the one I'm in. Millennials, and we have the emergence of Gen Z, who are very much engaged in the workforce now. So we have 5 different generations actively engaging in the workforce at the same time. And what we found is very distinct issues, frames, perspectives that each one of them have, and that we can find a level of ageism that goes both ways actively unless you really talk to all the different generations. And we see it in the communications, where some communications are really considerate of one generation or two, but not all 4 or 5 that they really need to impact. You need to consider this, because this type of diversity is often overlooked. So what does it mean? Reskilling and upskilling in the age of automation is a big set of issues you really need to consider as you look at the different generations in your workforce. Holistic employee wellness programs. What has become very, very mainstream, and I think this is a great advent, is mental wellness. It is something that is becoming that HR and benefits really need to consider how they cover it, how you as a manager are equipped to discuss it, to allow it to be discussed. So how do you deal with mental wellness as far as a legitimate, on par aspect of a person's physical well-being? Especially as we've gone through COVID, there's isolation issues. It's become very mainstream, and something companies, all of us, need to really grapple with. How we consider it, think about it, and are sensitive to it. Connecting work to social impact and purpose. What we found is this really interesting. It used to be just this emerging kind of millennial generation that wanted purpose and impact and social good. What we find is that the baby boomer generation and the silent generation also want to leave a legacy. So there's this, for different reasons, perhaps, we see this very common ground of wanting to connect their work with a social good, larger impact, leave a legacy piece, which is, it's not just about the bottom line or the top line. It's about impact, purpose, planet, etc. We found that's become very mainstream. Flexible work arrangements, especially after our collective COVID experience. Companies are really having to figure out, how do we go back to normal, because it's not a new normal for many of them. Leveraging social media within and outside the workplace. To what degree is it okay to jump in and see people's social media, to monitor it, to ask them to have certain protocol on social media, and to what degree you engage with your workers and employees and your key stakeholders and other constituents through social media, because we know the rising generation, it's very, very much their way of engaging with each other. I had a bit of a smelling salts moment. We've got 5 children. One of them is 19 years old, and I told him, I'm going to send you an email. And his answer was, well, email's for old people. People don't do email. Us young folks don't do email anymore. We, do other forms of social media and platforms for interacting and engaging with each other. So, even the modes and way we communicate are somewhat different. How we engage in different generations are evolving, and we got to be flexible around that. And then crystallizing what it means to bring your best self to work is a really big thing for some of these generations that we don't even talk like that in my generation. So think about generational workforce. What's the cut in your organization? How do you speak to and engage from their language and their perspective? Next one is gender identity and expression. This is a very much an evolving meta trend that has direct impact on any significant workplace, because there's rising awareness of the challenges faced by employees who do not identify with their sex assigned at birth. They don't look at their gender as binomial. It's somewhere often on the continuum, and maybe not what they've been assigned or how they're categorized. This is having a huge impact on a lot of aspects of how we interact as a company and as we interact with customers. For instance, at Target, what does that mean as far as restrooms in public environments and in the workplace? HR departments are focused on providing healthcare benefits that are inclusive of employees who are transitioning. You got to really think through that. We can't put our head in the sand. How do we support? What's our stance on that? Managers are in need of education around language and their responsibility related to employees' gender identity and expression. For instance, we, in our job descriptions for our search practice are now evolving for many of our clients to not saying him or her, but they and them, unless they identify otherwise. So actually putting different language in there to make it non-offensive, and realizing that, in many environments, categorizing people as him or her will be seen as offensive or a little bit backwards. And as the movement to recognize and accept transgender and gender non-binary employees continue, it's likely we'll see more focus on updating diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is where the training has to evolve. As managers, they need to know how to think through, be sensitive to, and manage those issues with people in their workplace, and how to get ahead of any issues and anticipate any issues and be very sensitive to issues around this. So again, gender identity and expression gets to how we even describe and talk about each other. Third one, we've seen the emergence of this concept of equity. I think we've all, embraced and understand the definition of diversity, right? Increasing representation of people from a greater variety of backgrounds. And we see the power of that. And then we see inclusion. Inclusion is, of course, making space and amplifying the voices of everyone, especially those that haven't been heard historically. But now equity has emerged as something that we really got to focus on understanding. You need to apply in your company. And what is equity? The way I think about it is really unpacking the decisions and the process that got you to an unequitable place, whether that is in compensation, access to resources, hiring, promotions. If we don't see equity, there's going to be greater accountability to provide a rationale for why and having a corrective set of actions to get you to an equitable place, right? So, understanding where the inequity is in your organization, unpacking the decisions, unpacking, the processes, unpacking the people, and making sure there's true embedded corrective actions in place to get to equity. So equity is the new accountability, and it will be something that's non-negotiable. It's not going anywhere, and it's something we really need to think through where there's inequity in your organization. Trend 4. This is a long time trend, but it's the surfacing the impact of unconscious bias in the workplace. My guess is a lot of you have been to unconscious bias training. When done well, I found it to be very powerful and impactful. It does really help us understand ourselves and give us those aha experiences that are absolutely critical so that we're navigating the world with less bias, with more clarity around our own predispositions, and giving people a non-judgmental look that we might not have historically. It's very powerful, and it translates not only to the workplace, but every aspect of our life. This will continue. This is what we see with our clients in the workplace, is that there's a renewed emphasis on unconscious bias as a very tangential, tactile, and meaningful set of trainings and experiences they're giving employees. So it's something that, as part of your training, I'd encourage you to make sure that this is embedded in it, and that people are having this experience who are new to your company and on a regular basis. All right, so we're moving pretty fast, but those are the 4 meta trends. Again, I encourage you to really think through, what does this mean for your workplace? And which ones do we really need to discuss and comprehend and put planning around? Now, let's get into one.
Excuse me, do you want to take a question that's come in?
You bet.
Okay, so from Barrett's asking, how do you balance the need to have equity without going to equal outcomes for all? The latter reduces incentives for many.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that's been an area. This is why it's an interesting evolving concept, and how I like to define it, but this is showing my bias consciously, is it's unpacking the decisions and the process that got you to an inequitable place, and then changing those causal factors that got you there. And for me, that doesn't mean changing the outcomes. It doesn't mean tilting the playing field, but it's being very, very self-reflective as a company around where are our collective biases and where were our collective decisions that got us to this inequitable place. Because unless we're pressured to or challenged to actually think through at a deeper level how we got to inequity, there's a good chance that we're going to repeat it. So I don't interpret it for our application in our firm at CMP as saying that we must mandate outcomes and enforce outcomes. Instead, we have to hold ourselves accountable for a process and a set of decisions that got us to an equitable outcomes. And if that means that we are underrepresented in a particular area that we shouldn't be within our larger management team, I want to know where we're recruiting. I want to know how we're interviewing. I want to know how we're assessing to make sure there's no discrimination or bias, and that we're leaning in and having the conversations and are in the circles that allow us to get to a more equitable place without watering down our expectations around talent and accountability. So I've found often you can't address inequity not by mandating the outcome, but by changing the process that got you to that outcome. So that's an important nuance, but that's how I read it, and that's how most companies we're working with are really thinking about it. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. And well, another thing, I think, often we see HR leading a lot of the DEI initiatives, but certainly in the last year or so, such an increase for all business leaders, right, to be focusing on this. And many of the people on the call today and in the CFO seat are auditing practices, leading these initiatives that maybe they haven't had to address before.
There's no question. Yeah, no, absolutely true. So it's a great question. I can understand where you mandate an outcome, and that is contrary to incentives and so on that really get into most organization incent behavior and drive the kind of performance they want. Again, it's unpacking the process that got you there and changing elements of the process, not the required outcomes. All right, let's dive into, these are 5 empowering talent practices that we have found best in breed, best in class companies are really enacting. I'd ask you to think about your own kind of application to your own world of work, and where you might want to grab a few of these nuggets and apply them and have a bigger impact. All right, the first one and the first 2 have to do with hiring. What we found is sourcing diverse talent. Often we've seen kind of people go through the motions as far as really casting that, sourcing and hiring diverse talent. I think there's a renewed emphasis to really do it right. Now, how do you do this? Where do you go to find diverse talent to get the same performance and outcomes, but with greater diversity? One is we find it helps to get a diversity brand, really talk to that audience that you're trying to attract. A lot of times they don't, and there's some subtle things you can do. We've seen, for instance, companies that need to to represent in their senior leadership and throughout their employee base the Latino population, casting a net, making sure that you're going to their schools, that you have bilingual advertising on social media, et cetera, that you really are talking to that audience is extraordinarily important. Affinity organizations, the Black MBA on LinkedIn. There's so many of those types of organizations. Are you members and are you actively engaged? Recruit on diverse campuses. Historically Black colleges, certainly, but campuses where the population is highly diverse. They're in every one of our states. You need to cast a net there. Often we've seen you go to colleges and recruit off college campuses that the senior leaders went to and might be connected to or active alumni with. You have to make sure you mix in alternative schools, especially that have a much more diverse population. Social media, that's where people are at. That's where they're engaging, especially those under 40. It's non-negotiable. If you're going to have a relevant brand for diverse populations, you've got to have a social media engaged strategy. Philanthropic activities with those groups, ERGs. What we found is a lot of great talent comes through referral. Are you engaging any affinity groups you have internal to your company, your ERGs, enterprise resource groups for different categories? If you do that, I guarantee that you will be seen both from a brand standpoint. You're going to get great referrals to communities you're trying to get after. I'd say putting metrics in place, meaningful metrics. You see some down here. Diverse candidates, job offers, turnover rate among diverse candidates. I've seen some very interesting data as far as turnover rates for protected classes just in the last few weeks. that tell me that when they come in, they don't necessarily feel comfortable. We're going to talk about that later. How do you engage and maintain or keep these people? But yeah, a list of things or practices that if you're not doing some of these, you really ought to think about doing these to reach and throw the net out and get the diverse talent. Next, it's another hiring practice. I'm a huge believer, and we have learned to be a huge believer in validated assessment. Now, assessment, when done well, is great because it's colorblind. It's blind to gender. It's blind to those protected categories that we often have bias towards, and we're trying to create the noise and bias against. We're trying to take that out of the process. So if you have objective, criteria-based, non-discriminatory assessment tool and process, you will have a much better experience and a much higher hit rate, both in hiring the right talent and hiring the right diverse talent, where there might be noise and bias against them through other elements of the process. I show a kind of a little data point from the Aberdeen Group study here on the left. There's a number of other studies exactly like this. Now, assessment done wrong, if it's not validated, it's not connected to true requirements of the role, I would say is incredibly toxic. But if you want to have a defensible process that really gives everyone a fair chance, doesn't overweight against things that really are not predictive of success, like what college they went to, et cetera, I would highly encourage you to introduce assessment. Next, employee resource groups. This is, if you're not doing this in your company, you should. Are they supported? If you are, do you have ERGs around the different categories and groups that you really should? What we found is it dramatically improves the work conditions and sense of engagement and affiliation for lower represented groups when they have an ERG, when they have an active ERG. And we've seen ERGs really drive an agenda that's very positive for different organizations, both by helping recruit from the outside those people, retain those underrepresented people within the workplace, and even drive structural changes within the workplace that have been real positive for everybody. So active ERG groups, I'd highly recommend them. There's just a lot of benefits that come from the ERGs and a lot of ways to engage with them and engage with each other. What we found is when you have active ERGs, your retention of those folks goes up, the sense of workplace engagement goes up, and the sense of appreciation and breaking down barriers and stereotypes goes up. So it's really positive all the way around, but they need to be formed, they need to be supported. Senior leadership needs to give them time and resources, space to meet, go in and show sponsorship by talking to, presenting to, listening to, and making them a key part of how you engage with the larger workforce. Another practice that we found is very effective in many companies is mentorship. Now, often we think of mentorship as kind of senior leader talking to junior leader or emerging leader, and it certainly is that. It's interesting. We actually work with a lot of CEOs and have coached a number of C-suite and CEOs. And we actually did an anecdotal study a few years ago where we talked about 43 CEOs, and we asked them, how'd you get here? How did you get from where you were to the top of the organization, as a CEO? And every single one of them, individually, independent of each other, without being prompted, talked about one of the pieces of that formula was a mentor or mentors along the way. You can't get there without being mentored. And we can't help others get there, wherever they want to be, and certainly even in senior leadership like you all are in, without a mentorship experience or two or three. So mentoring is how we learn. It's how we convey things, and it's how we sponsor and support and advocate. We got to make sure that mentoring is happening formally and informally in every organization. So formal mentoring that we found can be very powerful is, of course, skip-level mentoring, where every number of companies we're seeing now, where partners, senior leaders will have diverse talent that they meet with on a regular basis in a very formal mentoring relationship. And there's a lot that comes out of that both ways, both directions. The other one is reverse mentoring, where partners or more experienced employees meet with younger employees and understand their experience too, so that they are able to open up the aperture and understand from a generational standpoint different vantage points or folks from different perspectives and backgrounds than them. The colleague program, the retention of diverse talent in companies is a real problem. One way to address that, we found, is through the colleague program, where new hires need to have seasoned employees who they are connected with. It needs to be real. Where they help them navigate, connect, meet new people, create bonds, create friendships, certainly working relationships. Having those colleague programs to make sure that there is that connective tissue, especially if there's underrepresented, employees from underrepresented groups coming in is, again, very important. And finally, mentoring circles. Having collaborative circles, cross-functional especially, sometimes cross-level, where they can get together and talk about their experience, and learn together is another way of creating the connective glue to engage them and retain them. There's even more varieties of mentoring, but I would encourage you, if you haven't formalized and embedded some level of a couple of these, at least as far as mentoring up and down and sideways in the organization, you're missing a huge opportunity. Finally, succession. Succession, what found is especially the audit portion of succession is incredibly important. You've got to really see where you're at. And a lot of times this will highlight bias. So I'm sure many of you have seen a 9-box kind of snapshot like this, of course, where you're looking at 2 dimensions, in this case, potential and performance. I was with a company not too long ago where I saw that when I looked at who they had in the bottom right-hand box, grow at current level, but role model performance, but no capacity for a significant jump in promotability anytime soon, I saw an overabundance of women in that bottom right-hand box. So that allowed us to lean in and have a conversation around, is that true? Or do we have some innate bias in how we're looking at what we think are top performers? Are we stereotyping? Do we have some unconscious bias when it comes to their ability because they're women? And actually, based on that conversation, there was some movement of some people. I think it was really healthy. I can talk about a number of other examples like that. You really need to get it on paper and evaluate who your diverse talent is. And then how are we looking at them? And as we look at it, against each other, does it highlight any inequity? As we unpack it, our decision-making and our biases around it, does it unpack any inequity? And then, of course, you need to do something about it from a development standpoint. Here's some other metrics from a succession pipeline that I'd highly encourage you to put in place if you haven't. Obviously, the diversity around age, race, gender of the actual talent pool, percentage of ready now diverse candidates, percentage of roles of diverse candidates ready in less than 2 years, percentage of roles of no diverse candidates, high potential diverse candidate retention, and internal promotion. These are some real, if you're looking for metrics, I like these, and I know there's others, but these are some pretty standard ones that allow you to really look at how well you're moving the needle. And again, unpacking and addressing any inequity that might be in the process of succession and promotion. All right. I'll go through one more piece here, and then certainly if there's any questions, that you'd like to pose us or the group, let's talk about it here in a few minutes. I just shared, I think, the best practices we're seeing, some trends we're seeing, some data that we're seeing. The important thing is I want to make this pragmatic and practical and helping you kind of bring some ideas and implement some practices and insights, hopefully for your efforts in DE&I. But what we found is you can have a checklist of things you do, but it really won't take you anywhere unless you're truly committed. If you're not committed at the top of the house as leaders, you're going to go through the motions. And ultimately, you won't move the needle very much. People will see it, they'll know it, they'll understand it. The real commitment won't be there as it needs to be. And so how do you get true leadership commitment is something we've grappled with and really thought a lot about. And I'd like to present to you kind of an approach that we found is very helpful. It's interesting. As we alluded to earlier, a lot of companies have really leaned on diversity, equity, and inclusion training diversity and inclusive training to give people the experience they need to. And those can be very good experiences. But what we've found is a lot of time leaders, it's not enough for key senior leaders to just go through a 4-hour or 1-day workshop. Sometimes they're a little nervous to be real honest in there because, being so public around some of your own biases as you explore them and kind of get rid of unconscious bias and so on can be a little intimidating. And for good reason, they might feel it's not truly a safe environment in a training class for them to do that. What we found is coaching is a terrific mechanism or way to actually have leaders really explore and internalize the principles of the aha experiences and the awareness necessary to really viscerally commit to DE&I. And so we found there's a 3-phase process. And certainly you can, if you have a coach that you're already working with, you might want to review this with them. Or if there's people inside your company that do this kind of coaching and support work, certainly maybe you can review this with them. We have a Forbes article we've written on this that we're glad to send to you and discuss further. But there's really 3 phases to that. What we found in working with leaders to really get them to get it, one is you got to have someone safely in a coaching environment that you talk about their core beliefs. What is it that you truly believe? What is behind success? What are your assumptions about winning and losing? What are your assumptions around demographics and the kinds of people that you want in your organization? What are your assumptions around who you want to be with, who you're attracted and enjoy being with, and who you might not want to be with and work with? So exploration, honestly, in an honest, kind of transparent environment around your beliefs. And then understanding, given you are a senior leader, what's been the impact of those beliefs? It's interesting. I went through this process with a leader we will call Ray, and it was a very emotional experience for him as they really unpacked what his core beliefs were, where they came from a little bit. What he realized is he had a massive predisposition to want to hire and work with himself, basically. People who went to the same Ivy League type experience as him, who had kind of a big shingle consulting experience as him. And sure enough, when you looked at the 7 people on his team, 5 of them, were dead-eye, not only with the similar types of experiences as him, even the age range of him, but even, from a Myers-Briggs and other kind of personality characteristics very similar to him. And when he realized that he had really had an innate bias towards that, what had been the impact of that is some groupthink, and that was the second phase, groupthink. They got to places too quickly. They didn't have empathy towards different experiences. They had great retention because they all got along so well. But they had done a very bad job as far as engaging and reaching new audiences in the products and services that they offered, and actually even attracting in the broader organization the type of talent they needed. So when he unpacked the inequity, he saw that there was a lot of it based upon his own personal bias, and he felt bad about it. It was a very emotional experience for him. So awareness of impact, what's been the shadow of that? What shadow have you cast and what's been the impact of that? And then with that deeper awareness, the third phase is making commitments for better, right? Now that I've had an aha experience or two, what do I need to commit to? And it's good to document that. And if comfortable, declare it to people. How are you going to operate going forward? So this is a nice 3-phased approach. We can send you more information and reading on it. I'd highly encourage you to just say, how does this apply to you? And this might be a process that you or your team can really think through. It's not a one-time event. I think it's something we should all kind of refresh around on a periodic basis. Finally, you may see some information from Kathy or CMP. We are just launching next week a podcast called American Narratives. It is with diverse senior leaders where they're telling their personal and professional story. It's quite inspiring. It's interesting. It can be a little raw. We have launching, for instance, the highest ranked African-American IT executive in the United States, COO of large pharmaceutical companies, a number of very senior leaders really telling their stories. So we look forward for you to perhaps consume that and give us feedback. And finally, we are offering the world the first Latino career assessment for Latino professionals. And those are some things that we're doing in this world to contribute a little bit. All right. All right. I feel like I've been talking at you because it's exactly what I've been doing.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. No, great insights. I think the Zoom environment plays so well to look at the data on the screen like this, and there was a lot of important data and information from the study. So thanks for sharing that. We did have a couple questions and comments. There was through the chat, and some of that resonated around your comments around how do you get true leadership commitment to this kind of process. And there were several comments and questions coming in around ERGs, employee resource groups. One question is, what level of employees should serve on ERGs? Yeah,
I'd love your thoughts on that, Kathy. What I've found is it really is level-less. The great thing about ERGs is they're, as affinity groups, they're coming together for another common interest, whether it's LGBTQ or whether it's another kind of common interest area, and it tends to be level-less. I mean, I've seen what love about ERGs. I remember there's one at Whirlpool Corporation that did very well. It was actually the LGBTQ one, and you had some emerging leaders there. They were not yet managers, late 20s, who took leadership roles, and they were leading committees and activities where you had vice presidents and directors, right? And what a great stretch set of opportunities it was for those folks to learn, to build those relationships, to build that kind of connective tissue with people higher in the organization. So, I don't think that you're constrained by level when it comes to ERGs. What do you think, Kathy?
No, absolutely. And Ingrid made the comment, and I see this in all the organizations we work with, that ERGs only work effectively with senior leadership sponsorship. Yep. And making both sharing their time and talent in those groups, as well as making financial investments. So that they're trying to learn through those groups as well. Another question came in about how do you keep ERGs from becoming bitch sessions for employees? Thank you, Randall.
Yeah,
that's an open question.
That's a very honest question. That's a great one. Well, what I've heard is they need to feel empowered and they need to be given a task. And they might need a bitch for a while. I mean, there is getting in there, listening to them, and but ultimately, great ERGs are given a task and a mandate. And it might, we need your input on something. We need your 3 action recommendations on something, and we need to take action against it. So I found that there is this phase sometimes where they do complain and have some sense of bitterness where they need to feel they've been heard and understood. But you don't want them there parked in that place for forever. They've got to move on to a task. And what I found is good leadership, where you can take them to the side and say, let's make sure we're coalescing around an agenda here that's positive and productive. And so you know who the formal, informal leaders are that can help you with that. And then once they've been heard and understood, setting an expectation that they move the needle in very productive ways and giving them tangible things to do. Those are some things I've seen work. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and I think what we've seen the last year, certainly, and FEI has had a huge impact and put a lot of emphasis through our idea committee on how do you have uncomfortable conversations in a productive manner. So, Sharada, if you have any comments or want to jump into the conversation, please feel free. In the meantime, I'll ask a next question from Jerry. How do companies deal with the remote working environment that can limit communication of corporate goals and development of these kind of colleague programs?
Yeah, in fact, anything that's emerged with a new set of issues around isolation and around mental illness and challenges in the work and the home life. It's a number of managers that we've been working with will really tell us now that they're being brought into a conversation around work-life stuff that they wouldn't have been otherwise, because people are now melding their work with their home, and they're having to, figure out how to help these people in ways that they didn't when they were in the workplace. I think it'd be interesting other people's thought on this. I don't think I've cracked the nut on this. It's an interesting one, because you have the emergence of technology where you can certainly have side rooms. You can pop in with instant chat. You can call people. One thing what I have learned, and I've been told, and we've adjusted personally as a firm, is it's exhausting to look at yourself on a Zoom meeting all day. And some of the emergent research has shown that that's very exhausting. We're not built to look at each other. So we're giving the green light to turn the camera off on meetings unless you really want it or need to see something or see each other. So those sorts of things, I think subtle things can help. But I tell you, I got to be honest, I have not cracked the nut. I think this virtual, we're in the office here, right? I'm here. I think I see lots of regional disparity. I'm here in Texas, and we're going into the office. Other parts of the region, the country aren't. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but it's difficult, and I'm still trying to figure it out, honestly. I mean, what do you think, Kathy?
Well, just a comment. I'm participating in the FEI Summit this week, and I was in the opening presentation from Michael Sieber, which several on the call may have been in, and I thought it was interesting, some of his comments around Gen Y and Z, because certainly, to your point today, we really need to think about generational differences as a big component of our DEI strategies, right? And Michael's comment was that Gen Y and Z are finding it much more difficult to stay motivated in this virtual environment. And, really challenging all of us as leaders in that session that we need to be able to step up and lead in new ways and be cognizant of their feelings and how they're dealing with all of these issues, particularly in this remote environment. So, and one good way to do that is through mentoring initiatives and one-on-one calls, et cetera. But I just personally found that very interesting. And his other comment was that baby boomers seem to be coping better in this virtual environment. That could have a lot to do, obviously, with, we don't have young kids in the background working at home, et cetera, with us.
Well, what we do know, though, is it's always stated, but absolutely true. You need to phone more, touch base more, talk more, engage more, not less. They need to hear from you and know you care.
Absolutely.
And when we were going through some of the racial strife issues more publicly as a nation last year, we had to lean in and have some crucial conversations, and I was a little slow doing it, and I should have known better, honestly, with some people who are really having a tough time with that. So I think it sounds trite, but it couldn't be more true. In these environments, they need to hear more from their leader, not less.
Absolutely. Well, if there aren't any other questions, thank you very much. But thank you for sharing